All right, talking about David during the divided kingdom. And you remember, of course, some of what we covered last time was the fact that he was hunted by King Saul. Saul chased after him for what reason or reasons? Okay, jealousy. What was his specific issue? What's the thing that started, Clint?
Saul killed his 1,000 and David 10,000.
Right. They praised him because of David for his military feats. He was a great warrior and brave, where Saul and the other men were not that way. Nancy?
Well, I think it really started when Samuel told him that God had taken the kingdom. And from that, he didn't know at that moment it was going to be David, but he began to understand it was going to be David.
Right. So when that was revealed to him after Saul's own failures, there's within him this beginning of desperation. You can see that even in 1 Samuel 15 that you mentioned that. You know, he begging Samuel to do something for him, plead to God on his behalf. So he had that fear of losing that power, but then of losing his dynasty. And as you say, recognizing David would be the one. So there's that envy that was Saul's problem, and it was let out on David as he chased him from one place to another. And there were ups and downs, of course, through that account where he would say, reconcile with David, but then it wasn't long before he began to chase him and hunt him down. Places like that cave of Adullam or at En-Gedi as David was hiding from him. So we looked at those things, and we understand that Saul's life came to a rather sad and tragic end there, as there was a battle with the Philistines, and he went to consult a witch at Endor because God was not speaking to him. And this is the occasion where Samuel, of course, tells him, you're going to be dead, you and your sons, the next day. The battle took place there on Mount Gilboa, and there's really high confidence that is Mount Gilboa. And then up at Bethshan is where he died, and up on that hill there is where they put the bodies of Saul and his sons up on the wall. Of course, they had beheaded Saul and taken his head on a kind of a victory tour, I guess it would be, among the Philistines. As grotesque as that is, that was not really uncommon in ancient times, and I guess not uncommon today over there. But anyways, so thinking about David, let's look at Acts chapter 13, verse 22. Acts 13, 22, and this is just a reference back to something Samuel had said and the Lord had said. Acts 13, 22, who's got that for us? Carter, go.
And when he had removed him, he raised up for them David as king, to whom also he gave testimony and said, I have found David, the son of Jesse, a man after my own heart, who will do all my will. Okay,
so the contrast between Saul and David, and this idea of a man after God's own heart. How do you understand David being a man after God's own heart?
Well, one thing, and this goes back to a lesson I think that you preached about David at one point, is that he was a man that when his sin was brought to his attention, he repented. He turned back to God. And it just impressed me a few minutes ago when you mentioned about Saul and his act of desperation. And it was all things that we have account of that he did out of his own will rather than the will of God, and not turning to God, that led him to his final demise. Where David, as this says, he had a will toward God.
Right, exactly. And you can see through David's life that he was a man who loved the Lord. He loved truth. He loved righteousness. He loved the people of God. He acted on so many occasions in the interest of the people of God. Even when Saul was chasing him and trying to destroy him, David, one, would not lift his hand against Saul to do anything to him, but he also continued to look after the people of Israel. So he didn't go over to the enemy. He pretended to. He feigned that at times, but he did not go over. He was still one who cared for God's people and the righteousness of God's will and of God's law for the most part in his life. So he was a man after God's own heart, but he was an imperfect man. If we go to Psalm 32, the 32nd Psalm, and let's read verses 1 through 5 here. Psalm 32, 1 through 5. Who's got that for us? Go ahead, Tanner.
How blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. How blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not rebuke iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. When I kept silent about my sin, my body wasted away, through my groaning all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My vitality was drained away as with the fever heat of summer. Salah. I acknowledged my sin to you, and my iniquity I did not hide. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord. He forgave me both of my sin. Salah.
Okay. So David, of course, the sin that stands out to us, I believe, the most is concerning Bathsheba, Uriah, and we'll touch on that here in just a little bit. But though he was after God's own heart, he still was a man who had feet of clay. And there are times when he did things that were utterly foolish and sinful. And God dealt with him in those situations. But as it says here, as Ron mentioned a while ago, when he's confronted with it, he admits it. He moves forward in his life. So he's someone I think that we can relate to. That we can be good and righteous people and at times make foolish decisions and do things that are hurtful and harmful to ourselves, to people around us, to our influence and what we're trying to achieve overall. But that doesn't have to defeat us. It doesn't have to stop us from continuing to press forward that here's the right thing to do. And David's a great example of that. And under his reign, the nation of Israel became the strongest and greatest really ever. And I would argue that Solomon, even though Solomon's kingdom was a larger territory and it was more wealthy, that was all because of what David did. It really wasn't. Solomon was more the caretaker of it and reaping the fruits of David's labor. Chris?
I'd also add that he was a man of great faith, which we first see when he stood before Goliath. And he basically said, as I observed the soul of the lion and the bear, he will deliver you to it. With only 5 silver stones, there was no hesitation.
Right, exactly. He had a tremendous amount of faith that he did not flinch at going out to face Goliath. John, do you have something?
Yeah, and that faith, he would turn to God in times of need. But, as Ron and Chris are both pointing out, he wasn't content to stay in sin and rely on himself to overcome his problems. If he knew he did something bad, he would change, but he would also turn to God, knowing that God is the only way that I'm going to have the strength to defeat Goliath or to make it through these situations with Saul. He always knew he had to turn back towards God after his sin.
Exactly. It's that great faith in God. Paul?
I believe he had blood on his hands that Solomon did.
Yes, and we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Exactly right. He sure did. He sure did. Was there something else? All right, so a man after God's own heart, though he was faulted. You think about how much of the Old Testament is dedicated to him. Really starts in 1 Samuel chapter 16, and it goes through the rest of 1 Samuel. I know a lot of that is Saul, but it's all relative to David pretty much through that time period. And then 2 Samuel is focused on David and his kingdom. Of course, parallel accounts over in 1 Chronicles. A lot of the Psalms written by David. So there's a lot there. And then all the references from that, his life forward, back to him. And of course, him being a type of Christ in the sense, a king, a ruler, a man after God's own heart. And all of that. So the workbook, page 29, question number 10. It's kind of a, I don't know, not necessarily easy to answer, but what do you have there? A woman who could trace her lineage through Nathan to David. Who is that? Whose lineage is really given in Luke 3? It's really Mary's lineage who's given in Luke 3. And there's a side discussion about why they trace it through the men. It's not a chauvinistic thing. If you know anything about genetics, the Y chromosome is almost unchanged from one generation to the next. Whereas the X chromosomes, they change a whole lot more. But the Y chromosome, that's why it's traced through men in the Bible. But be that as it may, he's in the lineage of Christ through Mary. He's in the lineage of Christ through Joseph as well. Even though Joseph, of course, was not the biological father of Jesus. But it just shows that line of David and the king that would come from that line to be the Messiah of the world. Tom, did you have something? Okay. All right. So, thinking about this, let's go to 2 Samuel chapter 1, where David, remember 1 Samuel chapter 16, he had a private anointing to be the next king by Samuel. Right? So that's 1 Samuel chapter 16. And that was to show to David, and obviously his family was there at the time and those events taking place. But David was anointed there to let him know, you're going to be the next king of Israel. In 2 Samuel chapter 2 is when after the death of Saul, he's anointed to be king. So let's read 2 Samuel 2 verses 1 through 4. Who's got that? Philip.
It happened after this that David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, Go up. David said, Where shall I go up? And he said, To Hebron. So David went up there, and his two wives also, Ahinoam, the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal, the Carmelite. And David brought up the men who were with him, every man with his household. So they dwelt in the cities of Hebron. Then the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying, The men of Jabesh Gilead were the ones who buried Saul.
Okay, so David, of course, was born in Bethlehem. During his lifetime, as we just talked about, he's one place to another place, all over the place, as Saul is chasing him. And so when it comes time for him to become king, in fact, he asks the Lord, where do you want me to go? So he tells him to go to Hebron there in 2 Samuel chapter 2. So this is the first capital that David is. Remember, it's Gibeah is where Saul was, further up north in the up in the area of Benjamin, and now he's going to be really square in the heart of the territory of Judah. And that makes sense because Judah is the only tribe at first that really accepts David as king. The others are not on board with this. In fact, in 2 Samuel chapter 2, verses 8 through 10, let's read this about Abner and Ishbosheth. Who's got that for us? Go ahead, Jim.
But Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. And he made him king over Gilead, over the Asherites. over Jezreel, over Ephraim and Benjamin, and over all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. Only the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months.
Okay, so in a sense, you have a divided kingdom here that, of course, is going to be more prominent later. But Ishbosheth, Abner, who is Abner? Yeah, he was a great general, leader of the army of Israel. And he took Ishbosheth and enthroned him. Very frequent in history, of course. If you've got the military behind you who's going to appoint you as king, you're going to be king. And so that's what's happening here. The army, the military, at least the bulk of it, has decided to stand behind him. His father's military under Abner has decided to make Ishbosheth king. And it says they go over to the land of Gilead. So that's to the east of the Jordan River. And so remember, Judah's down to the south. You can see Benjamin on the very southern end there, and then Judah at the very bottom of this map on the screen. So Judah and David's power, they understood David had power. David had men with him. David was a very good military leader. And so let's go over here. Let's establish our home base, if you will, to the east. But it talks about the Asherites, the Jezreel, Ephraim, Benjamin, and all of that. And basically what it's saying is all those tribes that are settled around them and to the north, that they went over to Ishbosheth's side. So they aligned with him against David, at least at the beginning. Even though David is technically king over Judah at this time, there's that division. So there was war that took place. 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 1. 2 Samuel 3, verse 1. This was protracted over a period of time. Who's got that? 2 Samuel 3, 1. Go ahead, John.
There was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David, and David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul became weaker and weaker.
Okay. So David had to continue to fight. Even though the Lord had appointed him and anointed him as the next king, there were people who were not willing to go along with that. And the result being the conflict, the war that took place. But David grew stronger, house of Saul weaker. It later tells us in 2 Samuel chapter 4 that Ishbosheth was murdered by the servants. And so David ends up being king over all. Let's read 2 Samuel 5, verses 1 through 5. 2 Samuel 5, 1 through 5. Who's got that? Josh?
And all the tribes of Israel came to David and Hebron and spoke, saying, Indeed, we are the donor of your heart. Also in time past, when Saul was king over us, you are the one who led Israel out and brought them in. And the Lord said to you, You shall shepherd the people of Israel, and be ruler over Israel. Therefore all the elders of Israel came to the king of Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them in Hebron before the Lord. And they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years over all Israel.
All right. So 40-year reign by David. After Ishbosheth's assassination, the northern tribes came over to David's side, and they unite under him as the king. They acknowledge him, anoint him as king over all of Israel. And so he really begins in earnest at this time to rule. So his capital now moves from Hebron up to Jerusalem as he goes up there to take it. And let's go to verses 6 through 12 and read about this taking of Jerusalem. 2 Samuel 5, 6 through 12. Philip.
And the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, who spoke to David, saying, You shall not come in here, but the blind and the lame will repel you, thinking, David cannot come in here. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is, the city of David. Now David said on that day, Whoever climbs up by way of the water shall by way of the water shaft, and defeats the Jebusites, the lame and the blind, who are hated by David's soul. He shall be chief and captain. Therefore they say, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. Then David dwelt in the stronghold, and called it the city of David. And David built all around from the Millo and inward. So David went on and became great, and the Lord God of hosts was with him.
Okay.
Is that good, friend?
What verse you end up on?
10.
10.
Finish 10.
Yeah, great. All right. No, go through 12. Sorry. Cut you off.
Then Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David and cedar trees and carpenters and masons, and they built David a house. So David knew that the Lord had established him as king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the sake of his people Israel.
All right. Question number 6 in the workbook, page 29. What city is known as the city of David? Of course, it's Jerusalem. And then question 7, what spring is situated just outside the walls of Jerusalem, the one that's mentioned here? And you can see it on the map if you just want to look at it, if you can see it. The Gihon Spring. Okay, it's also known, I think, as the Serpent's Well. The Arabs talk about that, or the Dragon's Well, something along those lines. But it's interesting to me, when they go up to take this stronghold that the Jebusites hold, it was known as Jebus to begin with. But verse 8, what challenge does David lay out for his men?
Climb up through the water.
So how did that take place? I mean, just looking at that, now I'm assuming this is a reasonable representation of, cross-section, what it looks like. What do they have to do to start with? They got to go down, under, and then come back up and go up that shaft. I think one of the depictions I saw, there were some steps going down. Like you can see the stepped tunnel right at the very top. But you think about that. These guys, this was real like commando type stuff that we would think of our special forces doing today. That kind of thing. Sneaking in, going in, really dangerous, physically challenging to get in there. Does anybody remember who it is that was able to do that? Who took on the challenge? It's over in 1 Chronicles where you have a record of it, but who becomes the head of David's army? I think somebody said it. Joab. Okay. Joab. So his cousin, Joab was his cousin. So Joab was able to do that, and that's what helped them to take the city of Jerusalem. And any other thoughts on that? So they take that city. Why would he take Jerusalem? Do you remember anything about Jerusalem? Its location?
Well, it was the mountain where I suppose that Abraham had gone to.
Okay.
Melchizedek had come down from there. But in these verses, this is the first time that it's called Zion. And the chief cornerstone is going to be laid down there, and all the prophecies that about Zion emanate from this point. But it was very important that David take this city because this was an impenetrable fortress that only the Lord's anointed could conquer. And David, being the Lord's anointed, goes in there and takes that, which is going to be the city of promise from this day forward. Ultimately, Christ stepping in and being that cornerstone that's prophesied throughout the Old Testament.
Right, exactly right. It was a formidable fortress there, and it was on the border of Benjamin and Judah. Why would it maybe matter that it's on the border of Benjamin and Judah? What's this going to help with? you think about it, he was king over Judah to start with, and the northern kingdoms didn't accept him. But then when he becomes king over all the nation, he moves his capital to a more neutral location. So it's not as though, well, I'm staying in Judah. Well, David favors Judah. David's going to, just stay down there and look after his people and not care about everybody else. But he's now essentially straddling that territory between Judah and Benjamin, Benjamin being the first royal family with Saul. And so he's in a more neutral location at this point. So it's going to help to unite the people. And you think about this campaign to take the city is one thing that gave everybody a common enemy, if you will, to pull the rest of the army, the rest of the people together as they go to take this great city there that, as John mentioned, Mount Moriah is this area. That's where Abraham was. So it has deep meaning to all the Israelites and a sacred, if you will, symbolism to them. And so he goes and he takes the city, and they take it in a rather dramatic way, and he ends up establishing his capital here and building his home here and all those kinds of things. Any other thoughts thus far? So you keep on going down through 2 Samuel chapter 5, and you realize that the Philistines are not happy about him taking this territory and increasing his power. So they've moved in further to the north. And in 2 Samuel 5, verses 18 to 25, it talks about them moving into this area, this valley of Rephaim, and David goes out to meet them there. The valley of Rephaim is essentially west of Jerusalem. And then the fighting moves up to Gibeah, and it moves west to Gezer, however you say that. They move over there. So all that fighting is taking place kind of in that central territory to drive out the Philistines. And let's go to 2 Samuel 8. 2 Samuel 8. And I tell you what, let's read 1 through 6 here. 1 through 6. Who's got that for us? Go ahead, Tanner.
Now after this, it came about that David defeated the Philistines and subdued them. And David took control of the chief city from the hand of the Philistines. He defeated Moab and measured them with a line, making them lie down on the ground. He measured 2 lines to put to death, and 1 full line to keep alive. The Moabites became servants to David, bringing tribute. And David defeated Hadadezer, the son of Rehum, king of Zobah, as he went to restore his rule at the river. David captured from him 1,700 horsemen and 20,000 foot soldiers. And David hamstrung the chariot horses, but reserved enough of them for 100 chariots. When the Arameans of Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, David killed 22,000 Arameans. Then David put garrisons among the Arameans of Damascus, and the Arameans became servants to David, bringing tribute, and the Lord helped David wherever he went. David took the shields of gold which were carried by the servants of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. From the top and from Berothai, cities of Hadadezer, King David took a very large amount of bronze.
All right, so David is, as he's established his capital, he's got all of Israel behind him. He's seizing more control of the territory that belongs to Israel and also subduing their enemies that are around them, not necessarily, expanding into those areas, but taking control of those areas, as it mentioned various ones there. But he ends up growing the territory of Israel, and it talks about going up to the north. We'll talk more about that in just a second. But it says there, 2 Samuel 8, verse 2, how he subdued Moab. That's the area southeast of the Dead Sea. So he brings them, puts them under tribute, which, to bring under tribute, what does that mean? Yeah, pay money. He's extracting money out of them. And then it talks about the Arameans. Is that what you had, Tanner?
Yeah.
Arameans. Syria is what we would, I think, more commonly know as this territory. So it's up through there. And it said retaking it to the Euphrates. And maybe we don't think about this, but the Euphrates River goes through that area northeast of Damascus, but kind of the Syria Aram, as is on this map. So he takes it all the way up there to seize control. He ends up taking the Edomites as well, subduing them. So let's read 2 Samuel 8, verses 12 to 14. Who's got that? Go ahead, Jim.
From Syria, from Moab, and from the people of Ammon, from the Philistines, from Amalek, and from the spoil of Hadadezer, the son of Rehab, king of Zobah. And David made himself a name when he returned from killing 18,000 Syrians in the valley of Salt. He also put garrisons in Edom. Throughout all Edom he put garrisons, and all the Edomites became David's servants, and the Lord preserved David wherever he went.
Okay. So to Paul's point a little while ago, David, in his rule, he's engaged in warfare a lot. And he's going out, leading his people to bring all these enemies who keep harassing them and causing problems, to bring them into subjection to Israel so that their people are not harassed. Of course, this adds to the revenue as he puts them under tribute. But this is the life of David early on in his reign. And in chapter 7, it says that David wants to build a house for the Lord. Do you remember why he wanted to build a house for the Lord? What's his rationale if we back up just a little bit? 2 Samuel 7. Yeah, he wants to build a house for the Lord. Hank, do you have anything to add to that? Okay. What did God respond with there? Paul, what did God tell David about building a house for him?
Okay.
Did he allow David to do it, or did he deny David that privilege?
Decided to do it.
And why did he deny him? You mentioned it a while ago. Hank?
Had blood on his hands.
Yeah, because he was a man of war. And who did God want to build his house? A man of peace. And that would be Solomon, because of the work that David did. So he denies him that opportunity. But in 2 Samuel chapter 7, remember that this is where the prophecy is made about David's descendant, that the Lord would establish his kingdom, his rule, and that this one who would come from his flesh, in verse 12, would build a house for the name of the Lord, and he would establish his throne and his kingdom forever. So this is a prophecy really about the Messiah that would be the descendant of David, whose kingdom would be established and he would rule and reign forever. So you can't build me a house because you're a man of war. Your son's going to do that. Solomon would build that physical house, that temple there in Jerusalem. And then there would be one who would come after you that would establish this everlasting kingdom, if you will. Now then, what did David do? And I know we're backing up in the story, but 2 Samuel chapter 6. What's the thing that he did there? There was a big issue surrounding it. Great lessons in it. We're not going to dwell on it, but yeah, the ark, and he was celebrating, but there's something that happened here. Remember, they put it on an ox cart. Oxen stumbled. Uzzah reached out to steady it. He was struck dead. David brought everything to an end right there, and then they figured out how to move it properly. But he's moving the ark to Jerusalem. So just understand what's happening there is Jerusalem, when he took the city, was a political capital, but the ark being somewhere else meant the religious capital was somewhere. He brings the religious capital. The religious center and the political center are now in the same city. So he's consolidating it. Mike, you have something else?
I know you don't want to belabor the story, but there is a point where it says that David became angry because of God's outburst against husband. A lot of times we hear that David became angry with God, but that's not what it says. It seems that David is angry at himself for not doing the proper work.
Yeah, that's the way I would look at it as well. David just realized he had really made a mistake here, and it cost a man his life. Exactly right. And so that's interesting to contrast that with David's troubled life. Now, let's just briefly step through these things. But what happens with David in 2 Samuel 11? And this next chart, I think, should be 11, verse 1 instead of 12, verse 1. Well, what happens with David there in chapter 11, particularly verse 1? What's going on? Philip?
It's the season when kings go out to battle, and David didn't go out to battle.
Okay, so it mentions they go off to Rabbath, Ammon over there to Rabbath, the army's over there, so they're over east of the Jordan, a pretty good distance. He stays back in Jerusalem, and this is the occasion where he goes out onto his rooftop, he sees Bathsheba, calls her to his house, he commits adultery, and all those events unfold. But what it is, really, there's a good lesson there about if you're not where you should be, there's an open door for sin to be committed. And that's what happened with David. He should have been out with his army, and none of this would have unfolded at that time. But he wasn't, and so there's the door open. Satan took advantage of it to try to bring down this man after God's own heart. And we need to understand that's what it is. Satan is trying to destroy David, destroy his influence, and fracture that kingdom because he understands that God is working through Israel and through David to execute his will. So he wants to destroy that. He wants to undercut that. So that happens, and we know that Nathan goes and confronts him over this sin. He admits it. He does what he can to correct it. God puts the sin away from him. But God told him, look, because of this, the sword's not going to depart from your house. You're going to have trouble from here on. And imagine how difficult that was for David to deal with when these things popped up in his house. I can't help but to think that David's like, God told me this would happen. And how bitter that would be. Mike?
Yeah, I know that a lot of people say, well, David and Bathsheba should have been death and this and so that. But look at what happened. His family did something for the sin instead. And what that really helped, much worse that is God.
Yeah, this was an ongoing, protracted consequence that continues to come up in his life. And it's a cautionary tale for us that things like this, and particularly you think about murder, taking somebody's life, and adultery, things that the Bible deals very bluntly with, very sternly with, and how that impacts not just the people involved, it impacts a family and it impacts a nation as a whole here. So thinking about this, of course, you have Amnon and Tamar and the rape that takes place there, and then Absalom, her full brother, takes vengeance. Chapter 13 and verse 23, it says that after 2 full years, Absalom had sheep shears in Baal Hazor, which is near Ephraim. So Absalom invited all the king's sons. So maybe this is a better representation here, Ephraim. So he invites the brothers up to this territory to have a feast with them. And this is where he gets revenge on Ammon. And during that feast, he has his men kill Ammon, and he flees chapter 13, verse 38, to Geshur. And I've got this chart up here to show us where Geshur is. It's east of Galilee. So Jerusalem is further down south, remember? It's at the north tip of the Dead Sea. And maybe this helps us a little bit more here. It's the north tip of the Dead Sea. But he runs and he flees to the other side because he's afraid, Absalom is afraid something's going to be done to him now because he murdered his brother. He knew what he did was wrong. But then Absalom ends up coming back, and this is Joab's doing. Joab's trying to look out for David, but sometimes he just makes bad decisions in looking out for David. But he brings Absalom back. Absalom is unhappy with his situation. He thinks he ought to be king. And so what happens in 2 Samuel 15, beginning? What's Absalom's actions? What's his attitude here? Jim?
He basically starts a revolution.
Yeah. How does he win the hearts of the people of Israel?
People would come to get an answer for something or a decision. And he would tell them, well, that was really a bad decision. This is what I would have done if you'd come to me.
Yeah. And he basically tells them, I would give you justice. I would rule in your favor. If it was me, I'd rule in. And he would tell that to everybody. And that was easy to do because he really didn't have to judge it. But he could tell them what they wanted to hear. Oh, Absalom would be a much better king than David, and he's on my side. And so he won influence with the people.
Very much become a politician.
Oh, very much a politician. Yeah, he would fit in today for sure. Yeah. So, and he evidently was a good-looking man, as it talks about his looks, about his hair, those flowing locks that he had. But we'll get to that in just a second. So he goes down to Hebron and he declares himself king there. And the people shout, he's king. Why would he go to Hebron? It's where his father was first enthroned as king. So he's trying to lay claim to a heritage. If you look in times past, people will try to connect themselves back to somebody that's seen as legitimate or a place that's legitimate. You just go back in the Roman Empire. All the rulers of Rome became known as what? Caesar. Why? Julius Caesar. They, one way or another, they want to be identified with that down through the years, whether they were or not. And then, so people do that. That's what Absalom is doing here. It's just a way to whitewash the fact that he's an illegitimate ruler. So he tries to do that. David ends up fleeing from Jerusalem. Let's read 2 Samuel 15 and verse 23. 2 Samuel 15, 23. Who's got this? Go ahead, John.
And all the land wept aloud as all the people passed by. And the king crossed the brook of Kidron, and all the people passed on toward the wilderness. Okay. So David's in Jerusalem. He flees east out of Jerusalem as Absalom and his forces are coming up to try to capture him and seize power here. It says he flees off and goes across the brook Kidron. That's in the Kidron Valley there, just east of Jerusalem. And just east of that is the Mount of Olives. So verse 30. 2 Samuel 15, verse 30 says that David went up by the ascent of the Mount of Olives, wept as he went up, his head covered and all of that. So he's fleeing out east. Any reason why that might be noted in the Old Testament? Why does it matter that he crossed the brook Kidron and went up the Mount of Olives? Well, this is exactly what Jesus does after he tells the disciples that he's going to be betrayed. He crosses over, goes over to the Garden of Gethsemane. the base of the Mount of Olives, just like David did. People knew this history because it was written here.
Exactly right. So this has deep meaning in the biblical text, and then what unfolds 1,000 years later with the Messiah, the descendant of David, son of David, as he is described, of course. So Jerusalem is overrun by Absalom and his forces, and there are things that are fulfilled that God has told David, here's what's going to happen because of your sin, your unrighteousness. All of that unfolds. David ends up regrouping, and of course they have a battle. And what ends up happening with Absalom in this rebellion? They have a battle, by the way, in Gilead and over in Ephraim, the forest of Ephraim. But what ends up happening with Absalom? Philip?
His hair is his undoing.
Yeah. That hair, they evidently took pride in. He got caught in the branches of a terebinth tree. This is a representation of a terebinth tree. You can see that's pretty low branches, and you can see it's kind of thick. And you can understand somebody with long hair going in through there, he gets snagged because he's on the back of his mule. He gets snagged there, and he can't get out of it. And who ends up dispatching him? Joab. Good old Joab. There's so much about Joab that I really admire. There are other things that are questioned, but, I'm on Joab's side on this. Yeah, he's got to be skewered. It's got to be done. You can't let this guy live. So he gets rid of him, and all those things unfold with David being upset and all of that. But I want to get to 2 Samuel 24, the last few minutes that we have here. So that rebellion is put down. There's a little bit more stability in the kingdom at this time. But 2 Samuel 24, what ends up happening with David? What does he want to do? And who argues against it?
He actually wants to take a census of the entire nation. And Joab is the one that actually argues against it.
Okay, and the census, who is it that he is really wanting to count?
The fighting men.
Yeah, the fighting men. Why do you think he's wanting to do that? What's at issue here? He wants to see the power, the strength that he has in that kingdom. And Joab is trying to convince him, you don't need to do that. God's going to take care of it no matter how many men we have. And so he does this, and remember that there's that plague that comes upon Jerusalem, and the plague is stayed over the threshing floor of Arana. And that's where David offers a sacrifice and all of that. So if you look at this map of Jerusalem here, you have the city of David that's on the south side there. To the north, Mount Moriah is that very specific location. And we're talking about two different hilltops here. So this is the map of Jerusalem. You see on the left, the Dome of the Rock. That's where this threshing floor of Arana is. That's where the temple is eventually built at this location. So, and the Mount of Olives is off to the east there, Kidron Valley in between. Anyways, Lord willing, we'll pick up there. We'll move into Solomon and his reign next time.